Hello, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Today, breaking the bank to give birth in the United States. Have hospital profits taken priority over the health of mother and child? Our digital producer Malika Bilal is back from her vacation, so you can stop tweeting about where she is and start tweeting about our subject. What are you seeing so far? Yes, she's back, relax.
I am. Well, we've been tweeting all weekend facts and figures like the one I pulled up here on my screen about childbirth in the U.S. You just tweeted one not too long ago. And what I'm seeing from a lot of our community members is complete surprise. Mikey writes, wow, I knew healthcare costs in the U.S. were extreme, but I didn't know childbirth was so expensive. Hashtag sobering. Now, for those of you at home, if you want to join the conversation with your own questions or your comments, please do use the hashtag at AJStream.
Well, Twitter is just one way that you can keep in touch with us, but there are plenty of others as well, including Instagram. So check out all of our pictures at instagram.com/AJstream, which is where I am right now. And you can also share your pictures, and if it's really, really good, we may even feature your picture in our Stream of the Week series.
I'm Stephanie Voltson, CTO and co-founder of Notch, and I'm in the stream.
The joys of becoming a parent in the United States are often overshadowed by the rising costs of having a baby. The average pregnancy and natural delivery carry a price tag of, wait for it, $30,000, with an extra $20,000 if it's a C-section. That's triple what it was back in 1996. But do higher costs mean better care? Not so much. On the day of birth, newborns in America have a 50% higher chance of dying than all other industrial countries. So why have costs risen so much, and have profits taken precedence over mother and child? With us to help discuss this on Skype, we have Eugene de Klerk. He's a professor of community health sciences at Boston University School of Public Health. In our Google Plus Hangout, we have Charlotte Overgaard. She is a former lecturer of midwifery and joins us from Aalborg in Denmark. In Boston, we have Tina Cassidy. She's a journalist and the author of the book, Birth, The Surprising History of How We Are Born. And in Salt Lake City, Utah, we're joined by Cassie Cassell, a mother of two. It's great to have all of you here in the stream. I'm going to start with Cassie, because Cassie, you sent us a little picture just a few moments ago of your two gorgeous little boys. We've got Gabriel, he's just about 5 months, and then we've also got Jacob, who's almost 4. So you remember giving birth quite recently. Not talking about all of the baby products you had to buy, but when Gabriel was born, how much did he cost?
Gabriel's birth cost $2,000, and that included the visits and the postpartum and the delivery, so it included everything. It was a lot cheaper than my first one. All
right, and then Jacob is adorable, but how much did he cost?
I'm still paying on him. Wow. And he was over $10,000. So
wow,
big difference.
And,
yeah.
You wouldn't really challenge anything like that because the boys are so gorgeous. But yeah, there's a big difference between 10 grand and 2 grand. How did you reduce the cost?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Yeah, there's a big difference between how much it costs medically for Jacob to be born and then Gabriel. I mean, there's like $8,000 difference. How did you make that change?
You know, it's a big difference, and I have to say that the care was very different too. So I felt like I got a lot more one-on-one personal care with my second one than I did with Jacob. I would go the home birth and natural birth route every single time.
The New York Times did a whole study on the cost of American birth, and it's called The American Way of Birth, Costliest in the World. This is Renee Martin. I want you to hear how Renee Martin approached her pregnancy and how she was worried about how much it costs. Have a listen to this.
I don't know what to expect in any way, but I also don't want to make choices based economically instead of what's best for me and my baby. And so that's really scary. Even yesterday, I was just talking to my mother because we started childbirth classes, and they're saying, oh, you can use the bathtub or you could use the ball. And my mother says, totally innocently, well, how much does the bathtub cost? If you get an epidural, how much is that going to cost? And I don't want to think about that in my childbirth. I want to do what's best for the baby.
So Jean, in Boston, isn't that what every mum wants, just what's best for her baby? But if they have to take on a whole load of costs as well, that makes it really difficult. How do we even get to this stage in the United States?
Well, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. Part of it is the figures you put out at the beginning, the $30,000 and $50,000, are actually what hospitals charge. They don't actually get paid that. They're more likely to get paid something on, that's still outrageously, but get paid something on the order of about $18,000 for vaginal birth and $27,000 for cesarean. But even that difference suggests some of the difficulties in trying to figure out what the costs are. Most couples will have no idea how much this costs. What they will be aware of is their out-of-pocket costs. But and I think the New York Times article noted this, if you actually wanted to try to find out what the costs were, it's a process that most people can't even go through if they try. So that absolutely reasonable question of, will it cost more if I have a bathtub, is something that even the hospitals can't figure out because it's all built into their various overheads. We got to this because we've industrialized birth to a large degree, in some ways making it easier for hospitals by standardizing processes. That's what industrialization does. But in the same time, it makes it much harder for us to figure out just where the costs come from and how they're allocated at an individual level for any couple to try to figure out.
Right.
Well, Tina, Chris here on Facebook says that the reason for this, the reason for what Jean was just saying, is that profits have taken over as a primary driver in the healthcare industry all around, not just in terms of childbirth. Healthcare is not seen as a universal right in the U.S., and as you can see, that attitude, Chris says, is reflected throughout the system. Tina, your thoughts?
Well, I feel like we're asking the wrong questions. I feel like we should be asking what in childbirth processes provides the best outcomes as opposed to what costs the most. I understand why we're having this conversation because our insurance system is broken and thus families are having to pay certain items a la carte. But really the hospital and the government needs to be driving the conversation around what produces the best outcomes, and then let's work backwards from there. We got to this place because we have industrialized maternity services. We are very good at marketing and at putting a process in place around medical procedures, but childbirth is not like cardiovascular disease. It is a natural and ancient physiological process. It just so happens that it changes in every culture and seemingly every decade. And so here we are at a time where we have lots of technology at our disposal and we use it. And we think that because we have it and because we use it that we will get better outcomes, and both the cost of childbirth as well as the not great outcomes of childbirth shows that when you these two things together don't always mix. Just because you have the technology does not mean you should use it. And as Cassie's experience shows, she had a much better outcome, a much more pleasant birth at a much lower cost with a midwife at home. And I guess I would say that in any country, anywhere in the world, the secret to having outstanding maternity service and great outcomes for mothers and babies is to ensure that you have more midwifery care, more standardized midwifery care. Midwives know exactly how much everything costs. It's when you put it into a big system that it becomes much more complicated.
All right, let me bring in Charlotte. Charlotte, what do you make of the fact that Cassie is still paying off the medical costs of her 4-year-old little boy?
Well, that's just so amazing for someone who practices in a system in Scandinavia. I mean, we simply don't, I think when you're caring for women here, you simply don't consider the costs for women, and the whole thought of women's care being directed by their ability to pay and not the medical needs. I find that so difficult to comprehend. Let
me just bring Jean back in. Jean, if you go back 10, maybe 20 years ago, if you were a pregnant mum in the United States, you'd be given a flat fee for having a baby. And now, every single scan, every single blood test, there's a huge list of itemized costs, and you don't even know what all the costs are associated with, and then there's a big bill at the end of it. How did we get from a flat fee to a huge list of itemized costs?
Actually, it's even more complicated than that. We started with fee for service, which was exactly what you're describing now. Every particular test, every particular visit you would be charged for. Back in the early 90s, we went to flat fees. We went to global payments for maternity care as a way to, among other things, try to reduce the cesarean rates on the assumption that if there's a flat fee, then physicians won't have an incentive to do a cesarean over a vaginal birth. In recent years, it's broken down, and we've moved back towards this fee-for-service system as we've added more and more tests. Now, if the question is why are we doing that, part of it is it ties in with other payment systems. The tricky thing in all of this is, for the most part, it's not as sinister. There are clearly cases of people trying to profit from this, but most of it is the grinding ineptitude of the bureaucracy in these places that adapt to different systems and try to bill as effectively as they can within those systems. So the really intriguing question is, why aren't insurers more upset by this? Why aren't they stepping up and asking more questions about it? And
right, Jean, so what's the answer to that?
Damned if I know. I got to be honest.
Okay.
I interviewed some insurers years ago, and I was asking them specifically then about the high rates of cesareans and the costs associated with that. And the response was, overall, that this isn't a big deal compared to MRIs and CAT scans and some other high-end procedures. But now, simple volume has made maternity care so much more expensive and a significant part of overall healthcare costs that you'd think they'd become more engaged.
Right.
And our community is weighing in on those costs. Sebedaya on Facebook says the monetary cost of birthing in the U.S. is further compounded by emotional and social costs, taking away a mother's agency in her birth process and replacing it with high-tech interventions disorient the natural birthing process, leaving mothers and babies subject to distress. But Charlotte, as I'd like you to tell us, this isn't the case everywhere in the world. We have a tweet here from someone in Kenya saying this is just shocking. A developing country like Kenya is doing free maternity care and childbirth, but in the U.S., $30,000. Tell us what it's like in Denmark and in other places in the UK, in Europe, excuse me.
Well, in Denmark and in other Scandinavian countries, there is no out-of-pocket money for women, and all women are offered the same package, free and equal access to maternity care services during pregnancy, childbirth, and the postpartum period. And in Denmark, 99% of women attend this program. For curiosity, I might mention that even the Crown Princess was part of the public program and gave birth in a public hospital. So it's very popular, it's very mainstream, and I think that it's flexible too, that all women have midwifery care, and some women have also obstetric care based on their medical needs. So it's a very flexible system, and it's based on continuity, based on general practitioners taking part of the responsibility and a named midwife taking the other part of the responsibility for continuity of care.
Okay, Cassie, did you feel that at any point you were being scammed in your pregnancies?
My first one, I did. I had a lot of problems. First with the doctor, I felt like I was more in a herding cattle than giving birth to something that was important. The doctor induced me. I didn't need to be induced, first off, but he induced me, and then after 7 hours or so, he got tired and said, we need to get this baby out. He's been in there 7 hours, and they forced him out. It was just a way different experience. And then with the insurance companies, as far as cost goes, at the time of my first baby, I had two insurances. I had a state insurance and I had a private insurance through my husband's work, and my primary insurance said that my local hospital was out of network, so they refused to pay, and because the primary didn't pay, the secondary didn't have to pay either, so I was left with the bill.
So Tina, something you mentioned quite early on as we started this conversation is what provides the best outcome? Usually when you ask a question, you've got a sense of what the answer might be.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the statistics, it's pretty clear that if you have a low-risk birth, that having a baby at home with a trained midwife provides the safest outcome. There have been many large global studies that all come to the same conclusion. So part of the issue for American women, at least, is there are many insurance companies that don't pay for at-home birth, so that would be an out-of-pocket cost. Perhaps what women now need to pay attention to is the fact that a hospital birth is also becoming more of an out-of-pocket expense and probably a much more expensive one. But again, leaving the cost aside, women need to really reframe the discussion as to what is going to provide the best outcome. And if you are healthy and there are no obvious risks for you or your baby, then giving birth at home with a trained midwife is the way to go.
Well, Jean, I'd like you to pick up on something that was just mentioned on being low risk. On Twitter, P. Mimi says, I'm an advocate for less intervention in births, but aware as a pediatrician there are times to intervene. I live in a community where home births are common. However, things can go badly for baby birth catastrophe.
Well, part of it is to remember home birth may be a good option for some, but in the United States, it's still the new data just came out last week. That's really exciting for me for 2011. And basically, we're talking about 0.75% of U.S. births are at home. And so the question is really how, as we may make it safer for some people to have home births by setting up integrated systems where if there is a problem, the transfer to the hospital is smooth. I think we also have to look at what's still going on in hospitals and the failure of the United States to adopt midwife-directed birthing centers are a couple of options. And one thing we don't talk enough about, I think, is the extent to which it's our own fault. As we want to blame these institutions, I was part of a group that did a national survey of mothers about their experiences in childbirth. And one of the questions we asked them was about tests and more tests. And we asked, do you think an expensive test is better than a less expensive test? Do you think a newer test is better than an older test? And by orders of 7 to 1, the mothers would agree that newer and more expensive is better than older and less expensive. The only problem with that being is that's true sometimes, but certainly not all the time. And we historically in the United States haven't really tested these new technologies and these new tests before they get widely used in the public.
Jane, see, I have a problem with that because if you have pregnant mums coming to the doctor, they expect the very best medical care, not to crowdsource how many tests that they should have. So why would doctors be listening to mums about, well, we need more expensive tests and better tests, if in the end they end up with a bill that's $10,000? Those two things don't sit well together.
Preference for newer, I mean, this is very American. This cultural preference for newer and more expensive must be better. And sometimes it is, and a lot of times it's not. But we don't even ask that question. We adopted electronic fetal monitoring about 30 years ago now. And the tests from beginning to the present show the same kind of finding, which is electronic fetal monitoring is very beneficial for high-risk mothers and shows no benefit for low-risk mothers. And that hasn't slowed the adoption. They're absolutely universal. Virtually all mothers get hooked up to an electronic fetal monitor. And that adds unnecessary expense to the process. But the nature of it is once these technologies are introduced, they simply become part of the system, and it's really difficult to get them out.
So Cassie, you beat the system. You saved yourself $8,000 with little Gabriel, who was born just a couple of months ago. What would you say to other mums in your situation? They're pregnant, they're being faced with a lot of tests. What would you say to them?
I would say the largest thing with that is education. With my first baby, I wasn't educated. I the doctor said something, and so you did it because you wanted the best for your baby. It's the doctor telling you that. You're not going to question the doctor. So you just do it. But when you start becoming more educated and learning that this test might not be necessary, but this one might, and you can choose which one you want, or if you want any, you get to make that choice yourself. And education is very important.
That's a good point to pause on for this conversation. We're going to take it over to the post show at stream.aljazeera.com, so we're not over yet. But first, here's Malika with some of the other stories we're keeping an eye on.
As the Muslim month of fasting begins, dozens of Guantanamo Bay inmates continue their hunger strike. But the controversial policy of force-feeding them, albeit after sunset, continues as well. Rapper Yasin Bey, formerly known as Mos Def, volunteered to find out what the process is like. A warning to viewers, this video is graphic. Partnering with British human rights group Reprieve, Bey went through the standard operating procedure for force-feeding detainees, which involves snaking a tube through the prisoner's nostril and into the stomach. The video, released to The Guardian for the start of Ramadan, is part of a campaign called Stand Fast for Justice, which calls on people to start their own hunger strikes in solidarity with the Guantanamo inmates. We turn to the Philippines next, where a government-sponsored mapping project aims to counter the spread of dengue fever. This interactive map shows areas of Manila that have high concentrations of dengue-infected mosquitoes. Now, while the map itself is high-tech, the reporting process is relatively low-tech. Dengue monitors in local schools check special mosquito traps and report their finding by sending a text message. Those texts are automatically encoded in the map. And finally, almost exactly 1 year after it was released, Gangnam Style is still in style. Gangnam Style. In Cambodia, a project by the Taramana humanitarian group recorded 160 children from an impoverished urban district in Phnom Penh dancing and singing to the Smash song. The parody video has gotten more than 250,000 views since its posting on June 27th. And those are our leads, and as always, we want to hear from you, so send us your story suggestions on Facebook, Google+, or Twitter using hashtag AJStream. Femi?
You know, when I saw that you had Gangnam Style on your laptop as one of the lead stories, I was just thinking, I don't think I can take one more Gangnam Style video until I saw those kids' faces.
They're very cute.
Who are adorable.
And it's amazing, it was actually 1 year ago this month that Gangnam Style was released.
Oh, yeah. Save us from that. I'm just looking to see what we've got here for tweets coming in, because you can still tweet us on @AJStream about some of the stories that people are intrigued with our cost of giving birth in the United States. So Home Farm says it's giving birth is a human right, but maybe a human right that has a price tag on it as well. So we will continue that conversation in just a little bit. But we shift from labor pains to growing pains. As South Sudan celebrates 2 years of independence, what role will the youth play in shaping its future? That isn't just a simple question, because the youth in South Sudan, they make up around about 3/4 of the population, so they're very, very powerful constituents. So stay with us. The post show is next at stream.aljazeera.com. You know where we will be, always online. Thanks for watching. Hello again, this is the Stream's online post show, and we're continuing our discussion on the cost of having a baby in the United States and why some say it's become more of a business than a healthcare issue. So we're hoping to be able to get back to most of our guests on our Google Hangout, but in the meantime on Skype from Boston we have Eugene de Klerk, or Gene as he likes to be called. He's a professor at Boston University School of Public Health. Gene, I have seen you online, so I know that you can quite happily talk for 10 minutes even if we don't get the Google Hangout back again. There was one question that we alluded to in the main show, but we didn't get to, and that is the high cost of healthcare for prenatal and postnatal care, but also, as an industrialized nation, the US doesn't do well with the death of newborns on that very first day of birth. Can you explain that? That seems like a very weird combination of statistics.
Yeah, I wish I had a better answer to that. What we found is that the usual explanations that are often used, specifically saying that the poor rankings of the United States are a function of the diversity in our society, because the infant mortality and the maternal mortality rates for mothers and infants are much higher for births to black mothers than they are to births for white mothers. But that doesn't account for it, because even if you just limit it to lower risk populations in the United States and compare that to other industrialized countries, what you find is we still fare poorly. If you compare it only to sort of similar countries, we generally will rank last or next to last on most all of these standards. So the easy explanations aren't there. The other explanation that's often used is we simply do a better job of measurement than these other countries, that we're picking up cases that others are not. And that would be a powerful argument, except that we're not dealing with impoverished countries that we're comparing to. We're dealing with other countries with very good data systems that do just as well with what's called case ascertainment as we do in the United States. Which is a long-winded
let me
way
just
of
stop
saying,
you for
I don't know
let me
the
just stop
answer
you
to
for a
this.
second. So case ascertainment means we don't know the answer to it?
No, case ascertainment means we're doing a better job of finding cases than we did before. This is true particularly with maternal mortality.
Right.
That we're doing a better job of identifying cases that are linked to pregnancy and childbirth than we did in the past. But so are other countries. And the effect of all of that has been that if you look at a trend of maternal mortality in other industrialized countries, the rates are staying about flat, which may be a combination of better health and a better job of finding cases. What happens in the United States is our rate of maternal mortality has actually been going up, which again probably means we're not doing as well, but also we're doing a better job of identifying those tragic cases when maternal deaths occur.
That is just so confusing. You think if you're going to pay $30,000 for your birth of your baby, that your baby would be the safest baby on the planet. It's really confusing. There's something else that our community are bringing up, and that's insurance, Malika, right?
Exactly. They're saying that that might be one of the biggest culprits to all of this. Tina, on Facebook, a black girl in Maine says the current model of how healthcare is doled out in the U.S. means the insurance companies have every incentive in the world to nickel and dime expectant parents. That's exactly what they're doing. She says the profit motive absolutely have started to take priority over actual care. Will we ever see a reverse in that, if that's true?
Point. I think there's another one to explore, which we haven't yet, which is the fear around childbirth. And I believe that obstetricians and the hospital systems are very often set up to deal with trying to prevent bad outcomes. And so that typically means more tests or being overly cautious. There is a saying that doctors don't get sued for performing C-sections, they get sued for the ones they don't perform. So if you think about the flip side to insurance, which is the insurance that doctors have to cover malpractice, that's another aspect of this that I think we need to consider, because the health insurance companies perhaps have a list of an itemized list for how much things cost, but they're not the ones necessarily making those on-the-ground decisions every day when a doctor and his patient are interacting. It's the doctor. So if they're thinking that maybe they're doing the right thing, the safest thing, by ordering up more tests and not looking at the big picture, they're just trying to protect themselves and that one mom in that one case. You can see how if every doctor approaches birth that way, the costs can quickly get out of control.
Tina, this is slightly off topic, but do you have your dog shut away somewhere? I hear a little bit of whining in the background. I'm wondering if it's one of your pets trying to get out.
Oh, goodness, no. I have no dog here and no children around.
Okay. All right. Oh, Cassie. Cassie, let me bring you back into this conversation. How do you help us with... Cassie's gone home. Mind you, she has a 4-month-old baby and a 4-year-old, so she's got pretty busy. Jean, if we head back to you and just try and work out, so where does this leave us? If right now a normal regular birth costs about $30,000, where will we be in 5 years' time?
In all likelihood, it may slow down. Just given the pressures that are arising to cut costs, the question is going to be, how do costs get cut? And from what pressures will insurers start to place on providers? You know, back in the early 90s, insurance companies pushed very hard to lower the cesarean rate. And one of the things they did was encourage vaginal birth after cesareans. And they did it in a bit of a crude way, and obstetricians pushed back on that, and they pushed back with great success. Back in the mid-90s, we actually started passing laws about the length of stay for mothers in hospitals, which was somewhat of a reaction to all of those insurers' efforts to cut costs. So we need something that's more unified than just relying on just consumers or just insurers or just providers. And it needs a more unified effort across the board. One way to do this, by the way, is to start thinking more and more about freestanding birth centers. They're a nice option, a nice sort of middle ground for people who don't feel like they want to do a home birth, but also don't want to go through the process in hospital and avoid what we call the cascade of interventions. The study I referred to before that I was part of, we asked mothers about whether or not they'd ever had an induction during their birth and if they'd had an epidural. And we wanted to see if mothers had both, what happens, if mothers had neither, what happens. And among mothers who had neither an induction nor an epidural, the cesarean rate was about 5%. For mothers who had an induction and an epidural, the cesarean rate was 31%.
Right.
Now, these are first-time mothers that we're looking at, so it's not a matter of having a prior cesarean.
Sure.
Mothers who had one or another, the rates were around 17 or 18%.
Okay. Charlotte, you've been listening to this whole conversation, and things are so much more different. They're so different in Denmark and in Norway and in Sweden. What advice could you give to the community and women giving birth in the States? Is there anything that you can show them as a model that might work for them, or is it too late once you have the kind of health insurance system that's in place in the United States? Is it too late to change?
No, I think there are many really qualified concerns in the United States about how to improve care. And what Professor Clerk is suggesting about using the freestanding midwifery-led birth centers is definitely a good option, and today it's very evidence-based that they provide safe and high-quality care and also cost-saving. So that is definitely an option that is worth looking more into. Also, the whole concept of midwifery-led care for low-risk women would definitely be an opportunity to cut costs, but also improve quality. Because sometimes, less is actually more. And in terms of interventions, you should try to avoid unnecessary interventions, and sometimes if you have a lot of tests, you will find that some of these tests are actually driving up unnecessary interventions. For instance, the fetal electronic monitoring, where you will sometimes see that there are signs that are difficult to interpret, and they're used routinely, and it's not evidence-based. In a freestanding midwifery unit, you wouldn't use a continuous fetal electronic monitor.
Right.
And in Denmark, we don't use them at all for low-risk women.
Okay. We started with Cassie, and we're going to end with Cassie. Cassie, if somebody had told you that having a baby would cost you $10,000, would that have made any difference to your plans?
Yeah.
What would you have done?
Oh, I would have started being more educated from the get-go. Most definitely. I just can't emphasize on education enough, because less is more and I got way better care with my cheaper baby.
But both of your babies look gorgeous. We started with them, we're going to end with them. So this little tyke is here, that's Gabriel, and he costs $2,000. And he was a bargain. And then this little lovely boy is Jacob, and he costs $10,000. Are you going to remind him that? My mother always reminds me how much pain she was in decades ago. When he's naughty, you're like, you cost me $10,000.
He's worth every penny.
I'm sure he is. We believe you. Thank you very much to Cassie and Tina and Charlotte and Jean for being part of this conversation, and the community. How did the community do? Did they feel one way or the other?
I think they're shocked, and that's still coming across even 30 minutes later.
Right, interesting. Thank you for being part of this conversation. What are we going to be talking about tomorrow? Well, we shift from labour pains to growing pains. As South Sudan celebrates 2 years of independence, what role will the youth play in shaping its future? Good question for another day. You know where we will be, stream.aljazeera.com, always online. Thanks for watching.